So the first episode that you directed, called Johnny Temple, of
Yes.
Dr. Kildare, your first time directing a filmed television show.
Correct.
What was that like for you, stepping out the first day on the set, taking
Well,
over?
it started before the first day. I had been on staff starting in May, June, July, August, for 5 months, 5.5 months. So everybody was out to take care of me. When I was scouting locations on the back lot, Charlie Hagedorn, the art director, said something very important. He said, "Remember the words of John Ford, move the actors, not the camera." That was that. We had 3 film editors. Jack Campshore was assigned as the film editor for this show. And I had been in and out of the editing rooms, for the last 5.5 months. And so once I was most concerned to begin with my first day's work, just to get it off the ground. And so I was going to start on a Monday, so I'd say about Tuesday before that, I had that first scene blocked. And I took it to Jack to show him what I was planning to do with it, my coverage. And it was a long scene. It was a scene in Gillespie's office with Gillespie, with Johnny Temple's parents, and then with Kildare and another doctor who were silent observers of the scene. And so I had laid it out and took it to Jack, and he checked everything. He said, "Fine." So then the next day, that night, I'd gone home, and I thought, no, I'm going to do it different. So I didn't really, actually, I didn't change the actors much as how I shot them. And depending on where you put your camera to establish your master, that depends on how your coverage. So the next day I came, I said, I changed my mind. I want to see what to think of this. And he looked at it, and it was totally different camera work. He said, "It's fine." And we got to the weekend, and I think I'd gone through 3 versions. And Saturday I called him. He was at home. I said, "Can I come out to your house? I've done it again." So I did, and he checked it, and with a smile on his face, he said, "Fine." I said, "It's fine." So went in Monday morning, shot. By noon, I think I had 20 setups by noon. I had 39, I know, at the end of the day. The next day we went to Daly's to see it. And at the end of Daly's, Jack, with a big grin on his face, said, "What happened?" And you guessed, I'd re-blocked it again over the weekend. And that was the version I shot. And once we got started, I mean, I'd been around the cameras, and during that time and all that time observing on Playhouse 90, and the big thing with me anyway is the actor. It's the actor is the important thing, and I was very, very comfortable with staging actors. And so once we got rolling, I remember feeling, even by noon, I felt like I was, a veteran.
So about the actor, Richard Chamberlain, what was that like working with him?
He was wonderful. He was a better actor then than he realized he was. He just, first, right off the bat, he was terribly attractive, but he was just such a good actor because he was real. I mean, and he was real, and he listened, and you can't beat that combination.
Have you always thought of yourself as an actor's director?
I guess so.
Because with that deep experience in theater.
Yeah, and I like acting. I mean, I like actors. I admire acting. I've gone to many different acting classes and studied acting. I mean, Elvina Krauss at Northwestern, Sandy Meisner in Hollywood. So I was aware of approaches to acting, and I feel that as a director, you don't come in and have your way of directing, and then direct that, and every actor should adapt. I mean, I think actors are each very individual, and it's up to the director to handle the actor in the way that the actor will give the best performance. I mean, that's what a doctor does with patients. You treat them individually.
Did you learn anything from the crew members on Dr. Kildare?
Oh yeah. Oh, that's the third part of the triangle. Harkey Smith, who was the cameraman, who right from the beginning, when we would go into to do a scene, and he wouldn't let me just say, well, now let's do this setup. He would make me stage the whole scene, so that then, as I covered it, to be sure that I didn't trap myself. And that worked. I mean, that worked, and it worked for me. In fact, that's the way I did it right up until the day I quit. Till the day that it was all over. Because I've been doing it that way. I used to like to stage long masters, stage a long master, and then do the coverage of it. And Harkey was the one who did that. And Harkey also. There was a scene, it was kind of a tricky scene. It was done with a long lens and close-up. I mean, it started with Dr. Kildare, with little Johnny Temple's hands, with his hands washing, and then followed the hands across the room, and his voice was talking at the time, and then it panned up to a mirror where you saw his reflection in the mirror. And we did that shot, and because it was on a very long lens, and again, this was before zoom lenses, so I mean it was on this. I'm not sure whether it was on a 3 or 4 inch, and because of that, the focus would change, and the assistant cameraman kept missing, and I was getting a little concerned, and I suggested, well, maybe we should do it with a wider lens, and Harkey said, we'll get it. And we did.
When that episode wrapped, what was your feeling after finishing the first filmed episode that you'd done?
I was ready to do 14 more.
Was there a feeling of relief that you pulled it off, or were you pretty confident all along?
I was confident. I was confident. I mean, once I got started, no, I was confident. I thought that was, for a moment, I was thinking I missed something, but I don't think so.
You directed an episode of The Twilight Zone during the season that was hour-long episodes.
Oh, that wasn't until, that was over a year later. By the time I did The Twilight Zone, I had already done 2 more Kildares and a forgettable Checkmate.
Okay. Well, tell me about Norman Felton.
Norman was my savior. He was my mentor. He was just great to me. Friday, the 5th day of shooting. Well, every day I would go to dailies during the lunch hour with Norman and Herb and David, the associate producer, and then whatever the crew was, and would see the dailies, and nothing would be said at the end of dailies. Not a word. That was on Tuesday. That happened on Wednesday. That happened on Thursday. Friday morning, we didn't shoot because we were going to be doing night work that night, so we started later. So I was in the production office, and Norman was there. And I don't know how we got into it, but he said something to me, and I said, well, I said something to the effect, well, I wasn't sure, how you felt because you haven't said anything all week. And he just looked at me and he said, you can't say I bothered you. And that was, I thought, oh, okay, you don't need to rely on that. Again, you rely on yourself, and just have confidence in yourself. And if you don't hear anything, fine. And, you know, if you hear something good, that's fine. And, you know, if there's a problem, you'll hear about it. But if you're not hearing anything and you're not hearing anything bad, don't worry about it.
On that Kildare episode, that first one, were you involved in the editing at all? Did you have input there?
Oh, yes. And
you worked with Jack Campshore?
With Jack Campshore, yeah. Went back in. And again, that was something that I did it on all of the Kildares because I knew the guys. But it wasn't so, it was not from the standpoint of protecting my work. I was learning. And, you know, you learn so much. I learned so much in the editing room that affected what I shot on the soundstage.
Okay, so we're going to continue moving on through some of the other shows and episodes you did. Getting back to the Twilight Zone,
yes.
The Printer's Devil. That was an hour episode during a season of hour episodes.
Yes, there were 18 of them.
Burgess Meredith.
Yes.
What was that experience like for you doing that type of show?
Well, I liked doing different genres. And even within the Kildare, the three Kildares that I had done to that point, I mean, they were all doctor shows, but they were different. But this, again, was into a different genre, and I just liked it. I mean, again, coming out of theater where I had directed so many different genres. And I've lost my train of thought.
Well, I'm asking about, the experience working in Burgess.
Oh, yes. Burgess, the first time I met Burgess, he came in for wardrobe, and he was going to be playing the devil. So we went up to the wardrobe department, and Metro had these fantastic departments: wardrobe, props, furniture. And we went to the wardrobe department, and wardrobe had racks, rolling racks of pants, of shirts, of vests, of hats, of canes, of cigars, I mean, of everything. And in front of a full-length mirror, Burgess now started trying on. And he didn't just try on a costume and look and see what the costume looked like. He tried it on and then let his body react to the costume of what was that costume going to do. And this went on for a couple of hours of him just going from wardrobe, changing one piece of wardrobe to another piece of wardrobe, and each time there was a different Mr. Smith. It was just exciting to watch. I mean, he's true artist. And then came the time we had this. There was this 2 times in the show where the devil snapped his fingers, and the finger lit up and became a lighter. And special effects had come, and they were come prepared to show him how it was going to work. And so the special effects man showed him that the special effects man stuck his finger in a coffee can of ice, and then he ran a wire up, attached it to his finger, and there was some charge in there. And so that when he did that, and then they threw a switch, and it would light up. And he did it a couple of times, and then it was time for Burgess to do it. So Burgess stuck his finger in the can of ice, and as he did it, I said, "Now, Burgess," and I was reassuring him. I said, "Burgess, he's assured us that, that this is absolutely safe, that you're not going to burn when you do this." And Burgess said, "I'm really not worried about burning myself. I'm more worried about freezing to death."
Were there 2 views about how lighting should be on this episode from
There sure was.
and the director of photography? Tell me about that.
When the show opened, Doug, the Robert Sterling character, is at his wit's end. His newspaper is losing business. There's been a big chain that has come to town, a flashy newspaper. He's just lost his linotype operator, and he is despondent. So he finishes off his bottle of booze, and he drives to a bridge, and he's going to jump off. and a stranger appears, and it's the devil. And when Doug got out of his car, he left his headlights on, and this was just a bridge on Lot 3 of Warner Brothers. Great set. And I had envisioned the scene that the headlights would be the light source, that it would be lighting Doug, but because the devil, Mr. Smith, who had stopped in front of it, you would not see him. He would be silhouette. He would be backlit. Mm-hmm. And at the end, when Doug has changed his mind and he's not going to jump off the bridge and he's now going to drive back into town and give Mr. Smith a ride back in, and as he walks past him, Mr. Smith says, "Oh, wait a minute. He had earlier asked him for a light. And he said, "Wait a minute," and he snapped his fingers, and that was when I wanted to see his face for the first time. And so I presented that to George. That awful, I can't remember his name. My retribution.
The DP, you mean?
Huh?
The DP's name?
Yeah.
Oh.
George something. Anyway, so I told him that was what I wanted, and George said, "I don't see it that way." So we called Herb over, and I understand why Herb. I mean, Herb at this time, George had been the cameraman on all of the Twilight Zones up until then. Herb was the new kid on the block, and Herb ended up not even doing all 18. I think Herb had a problem, and I don't know if it had already started to surface. I don't think Rod was always happy with Herb.
Was this George Clemens? Is that who the
yes,
DP was? Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Anyway, Herb went with George, so we had it lit, see all the faces. And it works. I mean, the actors were so good that it still worked, but I just think it would have been more fun the other way.
Was Rod Serling around during
No.
this episode at all?
Not at all.
Was he, since you had, I assume, had met him when Playhouse 90, because you were around, was he aware of who was directing each episode? Do you think he was even aware that you were?
Oh, yes, because a month or 3 or 4 weeks before I got the offer to do this, there was an offer from Herb Hirschman. Did I say Herb Hirschman before?
No, but you did now.
I think I called him
you
Herb
said
Brodkin.
Herb,
yeah.
And he was producing that season.
Herb Hirschman, who is a producer, and he had sent the agency called me that he had put a hold on me to do a Twilight Zone, and this was exciting. This was earlier, and then had to call back and had to cancel it. It was a Rod Serling script, and Rod wouldn't okay me. Mm. So then this time I got a Charlie Beaumont script, and it was a wonderful script.
So were your encounters with Rod Serling personally during the time of Playhouse 90?
Mm-hmm. But again, I think at that point, I don't know whether he knew me as a production supervisor or just as a secretary. I'm not sure.
What was your impression of him?
A talented man, I think, a little neurotic. He was a talented man. I think that sometimes the talent, because of circumstances and because of a show like Requiem and a series like Twilight Zone, I think the perspective can be a little overblown.
He's so well known as the narrator of the Twilight Zone.
Mm-hmm.
When he spoke in real life, let me say,
yes, just like
did
that.
he sound just like that?
Yes, just like that.
Let's talk about a couple of series you did that were pretty notable. Route 66 and Naked City. You met with Herbert Leonard, who produced both of those shows.
Oh, yes.
How did that go, and how did that lead to those shows?
It was January of 1963. At that point, I had done the Twilight Zone. I had done another show over at Universal, and now it looked like there wouldn't be any work. I mean, this was January. There was no work until May, June, and I got a call from one of my agents, who said, "You have an appointment tomorrow. Go over. It was a Wednesday. go over to meet Herbert Leonard at Screen Gems about doing Route 66. So I said, oh, good. So the next day I went over and went into this big office, but this was the old Columbia at Sunset and Gower. And I mean, 30 years before, that studio was known as Poverty Row. So you can imagine what it was like then. So I went into this large office, and it was not posh. And there was activity going on all over the place. Burt Leonard was behind a big desk, and there was activity all over the room, and I sat down, and he was on the telephone. And he would ask me a question, and then while I was answering it, he was back talking on the telephone. And then when I finished, he'd ask me another question, then go back on the telephone. And, and all this other stuff going on around the room. And then after 4 or 5 questions, I was dismissed, and I thought, okay. So I went home, and no sooner got home, I got a phone call, and it was from my agent. He said, you got the job, which came as a shock. So he said, you're to call tomorrow, Thursday, to see about the script. So at the appointed time, the next day, I called and spoke to, I think it was Dick Wolf, and I don't think it's the Dick Wolf that's on Law and Order or whatever, but and he was one of the associate producers, and he said, well, the script didn't come in, but the writer did, and he's back from the location. He said he solved his script problems, his plot problems, and he's gone home to start writing it. Come in tomorrow, 3 o'clock, bring your baggage because you're leaving tomorrow night for Corpus Christi, Texas. So I went in the next day, and they had handed me 19 pages of a script by Sterling Silliphant in the closing of a trunk. And it was wonderful. I mean, if I thought the Twilight Zone was far out, I mean, this went over the edge. This was great stuff. It was only 19 pages. And they told me that they had, I was told that it had already been cast. They didn't have a script yet, but it had been cast off of the story outline. And that we had Ed Begley, Ruth Roman, and Don Dubbins. And Don, that was great with me because I'd already done a play with Don, and I'd done a television with Don. So at least I had one face that I knew. And before I left that day, I was given 4 more pages. And then that night, got on the plane for Corpus Christi, Texas, arrived the next morning, and was told we were going to start shooting Monday morning. Now, the normal prep time for a show would be 6 or 7 days. And here, without a script, I was going to start shooting in 2. So the script we had and a major location was a ferry, the ferry boat. So they took me over to the ferry boat, and I blocked out, and we had that whole sequence, the whole sequence that took place there. Well, there was an added thing an added scene that came later at the ending, but the original, the opening was all there. So I laid out my staging, my camera angles, and that was scheduled to be shot Monday morning. And then we had to find the only other set that we knew of that we had in the script was described a large house up on stilts in a lonely section of the beach with nothing visible in terms of any other residence in either direction. We drove up and down the beach, and there was no such animal. So we drove up and down again, and Sam Anners, the production manager, said, it has to be here. He knew Sterling, and he said, if Sterling wrote it, it's because he saw it. We drove up and down, and it wasn't there. We finally found a 1-room shack up on stilts, and we went in, and it was just 1 room. And we said, well, this will have to be it. Now, I don't remember whether there was a scene, whether in that first part there was a scene where she exited the room, or whether we feared that she might, we had more pages coming, whether we were going to have to prepare. There was a closet with a curtain hanging on it. And we said, we'll hang a door here, and if she has to exit, she'll just exit and just walk into the closet, and it'll be like on a regular set. It'll just be another room, but it'll just be the closet. Well, meanwhile, they had a lot of work to do then, to do the door and to dress the set. So we started Monday morning, scheduled out at the beach, at the ferry boat. We get there Monday morning. Jack Marta says, I can't shoot. It was an overcast, foggy day. We're black and white. He said, there's nothing to shoot people against. I mean, your close-ups are going to be against sky, and in black and white, they're just all blend together. So we ended up at the end of a pier where there was a big enclosure, big room, and we spent the day out at the end there. I think I got 3 or 4 inserts of shooting down at the water, of a fish coming out of the water and some stuff like that. But we just didn't, there was nothing to shoot. And so we were scheduled to come back the next day, except the next day the weather is forecast to be more of the same. So that night, from Hollywood, they dictated on the telephone 3 scenes, and a secretary in Corpus Christi took them down, typed them up, distributed them then to the actors, to me, to the crew. Leonard called me to tell me where in the script those scenes went. And that's what we shot the next morning. We started shooting the next morning, and Ed Begley, Don Dubbins, John Lorimore, Guy Raymond, I can't remember the other actor's name, in the fish house. And we did the scene. By noon, we had the scene in the can, and I thought, oh, finally. And Jack Marta, the director of photography, came to me and he said, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but there was a camera malfunction. We're going to have to shoot everything over that we did this morning. I said, okay. So we went to lunch. We came back. We reshot the scene. We had blocked it all, and we shot it and got it done in a hurry. Shot the other 2 scenes that day. And then, by then, we were off and rolling, and we just kept going.
That series, Route 66 and Naked City, were both largely shot on location as opposed to like Hollywood.
Totally on location.
Sound stages. What did you prefer? Did you like being out on the road with all of its challenges?
Oh yeah, it was a whole different experience. It was a whole different experience. No, I liked. I was not thrilled with shooting interiors on the road, because usually on an interior, that's when you have really heavy dramatic scenes, and I liked the feel of the soundstage. I mean, there was a comfort in that. But as far as shooting location work, oh no, I liked shooting location work. The wider the lens, the better.
So tell me about Naked City. Was that...
Well, that was my next one. Yeah. We finished that. Jack Marta, on the ride back on the plane, I had some concerns because I just wondered whether I was being a little overly ambitious in what I was trying to do. And I was saying to him, I think what I have to do now, I really have to sort of study this whole thing of location work so that I can curtail and allow and just plan the amount of work that can be done. And Jack Marta said, don't you do that. He said, you plan what you want to do. It is up to us, the crew, to do it. Don't you start cutting corners. And so then I went to New York, and I'm not a New York person. I get very claustrophobic there, but I love to shoot there because you cannot get a bad shot there, unless you put the camera right up against a brick building and shoot it. But if you shoot with a wide enough angle lens and are not shooting into a building, so you're getting some perspective, there just is no such thing as a bad shot.
Let's talk about some other shows that you did in the 60s. There was a series called Breaking Point.
Oh, I love
and
that show.
The episode Bull Roar had a kind of a controversial theme about a young man who thought he might be gay.
Yes.
Was that, at that time, what was that like, doing an episode that, at the time especially, was considered controversial?
Well, there's a whole story there. In the teaser, the young boy has come to the psychiatrist, and he's telling what had happened with him, an incident with his brother and some man that picked them up in a bar. And he had concerns, and the psychiatrist said, "What are your concerns?" He said, "Am I a man?" And he said, "Or what?" "Or a homosexual." And we think that was the first time probably that word was ever uttered in a dramatic show on television. George Lefferts, who was the creator and at that point producer of the show, later in the season he became the exec, and Richard Collins, the associate producer, moved up to producing. But George told me the story. ABC had come to him. Mita Rosenberg had created the Breaking Point as a series, and ABC came to George Lefferts, who was an established producer, writer in New York, and they wanted him to produce it, to create it, to develop it and produce it. And George said that he would only do it on the condition that there were half a dozen topics. If he would be allowed to do those topics, he would do it. And ABC said, absolutely. So he went to work, and of course, probably the first one out of the tunnel of his list was Breaking Point, was the Bull Roar. And so when they sent the story outline to ABC for approval before they moved it into script, ABC sent back. They denied it. They said, "No, I'm sorry, that is not acceptable." And George said, he said back to them, "Read my contract." And so they did, and he was allowed to pursue it. And it was a fine script. He told me that his first choice to do the lead, the psychiatrist version of Dr. Kildare or Ben Casey, was Robert Redford. And he had sent the script, the developed script, to Redford, and he told me that Redford told him that he had walked the beach, because Redford in 1963, that was quite a while before Redford really broke through. I think at that point, I'm not sure, he had television. I think maybe he had an independent feature. And Redford said he had walked the beach for hours, mulling, should he accept it? I mean, could he afford to turn it down? And finally, he opted, rather than doing the series, which, was a nice bundle of money at that point, he was going to go off and do a new play in summer stock. And the play was Barefoot in the Park. And so I had one other thing to get to.
About, okay. Well,
oh yes, I know what it was. So then we now we're now in prep, and they've accepted the script, but Dorothy Brown, who was the head of, I have to call it censorship. They had a fancier title for it, but the head of that department, she didn't just send over some notes of things she wanted corrected. She requested a meeting. So she and an underling came over for a meeting, and George and Richard Collins and I was in the meeting, and she started going through the changes that she was requesting. And a lot of them she went through and things she would ask for. And I remember many times I'd say, well, rather than change it, just cut it. And then she got to where she said she wanted somebody to call Paul. That was this young man's name. They wanted someone to call him a sissy. And I went ballistic. I just blew my stack so that George invited me to come out in the outer office. And he said, I think you'd better go home. He said, we'll get through this. So I went home, and they got through it, and nobody called Paul a sissy. And there was one other item in the script that we got by earlier, before that meeting. There was a line in the script. There's a young gal, Marriott Hartley played her, and if this all took place at a construction site, and she's walking across the grounds, and the guys are all whistling and calling out to her, and one of the guys, Bill Bramley played him, called out, "Hey, honey, you want to ride on my bulldozer?" And George earlier, at one of our early meetings, said, well, I know we're going to have to lose that line. I said, no, we won't. I said, he's sitting on a bulldozer. He's sitting on a bulldozer when he says it. And we got the line through because of that. And when we shot it and we were on location and we needed to do a wild loop to protect it in case, because they didn't want to have to bring the actor in just for a short line. So I had Bill do, I don't know, half a dozen readings of that line. And George said, we're going to pick the dirtiest reading. But that was the Bull Roar. Fine show.
You did a couple of episodes of a show called Arrest and Trial. What was unusual about that format?
Well, number one, that it was the first filmed 90-minute show. And the fact that it really was two shows in one, the arrest and then the trial. That was the important thing. Two big stars, Ben Gazzara, Chuck Connors, good supporting cast, being done at Universal, which was not my favorite place to work, but for a change. Up until then, I'd worked there twice, and both times had done 5-day shows. This time, it was a 90-minute show, and they were giving it 9 days, which meant they were allowing 6 days, and 6 days per hour. So that for Universal was extensive.
During production of an episode called Funny Man with the Monkey, production was shut down. Why was it shut down?
Well, because of Kennedy. We were shooting on that day. We were shooting down on Skid Row. Mickey Rooney was playing a drug addict, and it was scenes of him looking for a place to get a fix, and then spotting the police, and then running in the chase through Skid Row. And we went down there, and we had got most of the morning's work done. I was on top of a 6-story building with the camera, with an Aeroflex, shooting down to do a shot of Mickey running through the street. And nobody was paying attention. We were set to go, and nobody was paying attention. I kept calling down, let's go, we're set. And I was being ignored, and finally I called down and said, come on, what is it? Let's do it. What's happening? And one of the second assistant director started to say something, and Eddie Dodds, who was the first assistant, I heard him say, don't say it. So I knew something was up, so I went running down the six flights, and and found out that Kennedy had been assassinated. And then I remember sitting in the back seat of a car with bodies on either side of me. Mickey was in the front seat with bodies on either side of him with the radio on, and all of the inhabitants of Skid Row were around. The car windows were open. It was like being in church as we heard the news report. And then from there, I think I had one more shot to do, and I asked Mickey if he could do it. He did. He said, yeah. He did it, and then he went home. And most of the town shut down. We didn't. We went back to the studio they sent us back to the studio, and I tried to get a scene with John Larch and Benny Gazzara, and it was like pulling teeth. That was not a good day.
What was it like to direct Barbara Stanwyck in The Big Valley?
Well, she was a very special, special lady. To begin with, she's tiny. She was tiny. And when I first met her, and you see these gals on the screen, Crawford, Stanwyck, Beulah Bondi, who played all these, these giant mountain women. And you met her, she wasn't 5 feet tall. And Stanwyck was, I don't know, maybe 5'1", 5'2", but tiny. I mean, still built like she had been built, white hair. And I met her and I said, Miss Stanwyck, she said, Missy. She refused to be called Miss Stanwyck. Missy. She was a great, great lady. We, just the total professional. There was a scene in the ranch house with all of the characters, Stanwyck, Richard Long, Linda Evans, Peter Breck, Lee Majors, and the other boy, Charles somebody, who was the other son who disappeared after the first season. And I blocked the scene, and all the marks were made, and then as the crew took over to light it, everybody went to their dressing room except Stanwyck. Stanwyck went and sat down in her chair right by the camera, and she just sat there waiting. When the lighting was ready, they said they were ready. The assistant director said, okay, places. And then the second assistants went off to the dressing rooms to bring everybody back. Stanwyck just got up, went, stood on her mark. She was standing there as they all arrived. We did that. Then we did a close-up. And as we did the close-up, again, everybody disappeared. Stanwyck was there. And after 2 or 3 times, as we sat down again waiting while they were lighting, and I said to her, I said, you know, Missy, that's really not right. That you're standing there waiting for them. They should be standing there waiting for you. And she sort of smiled appreciatively. And the assistant director, an old timer, was standing right by where he heard it. And he said, that's Missy. That's the way she was. He said, Bob was the same way. Bob Taylor. He was the same way. And Stanwyck looked at me with that special look that only she had, and she said, I trained him right.
Great, that's great.
Hmm?
Great story.
Yeah.
You directed 5 episodes.
Can I tell one more story on Stanwyck?
Sure.
Yeah. We had one day, again, it was not going to be on a Friday, where we were going to do a night shot. And it was Peter Breck attached to, he had broken his leg, and he was attached to a stretcher, and he was being hauled up an embankment. And they had found an embankment behind the sound stage, and they figured we could shoot it there. So we started later, and I think I didn't even have enough work, so they were even doing some pickup scenes for another show. And then I did some work on the sound stage before we got to that. And Stanwyck, of course, she wasn't due until we did that. She was there, Johnny on the spot, in wardrobe, the Kleenex on her collar so the collar wouldn't get soiled, all ready to go, sitting in her chair, watching. And I heard Jules Lavin, the short one, I think it was Lavin. He was standing by her, and he was saying to her, now, Missy, he said, you know, we'll work tonight, but it shouldn't be too late. And Stanwyck said, what about food? And he said, well, your tray, we'll have your tray for you in the dressing room. It'll be there. She said, not me, the men. And he said, well, they'll get their meal penalty. And she said, fuck the meal penalty. These guys have been working all day. They need food. And they sent down to the delicatessen down the street on Ventura Boulevard, brought back these trays, huge trays of food. Who was behind the table handing them out? Stanwyck. And when Stanwyck was done with that, then she took sandwiches in her hand because there were guys unloading the trucks who couldn't come pick up their sandwich. She went and found them. Then she went and ate her meal.
Class act.
Oh, absolutely. I had heard about that kind of thing early on in the 50s. I did a play with Malcolm Atterbury, who was new. He had a wonderful career later, but he was very new, and he had done a film. He had, playing a small role with. It was a movie with Stanwyck, and it was a scene in a hospital corridor, and she had sprained her ankle, and she had to walk. It was a long dolly shot of her walking down the corridor, and she stopped to have a short scene with a young intern. And the intern, Malcolm said, was a new kid. It might have been his first job. He was nervous. And Stanwyck, with this sore ankle, she hobbled up to her mark, and when they called for the take, down she walked, never a hint of the injury. Stopped, started the scene with him, and the kid was flustered and blew it. Cut, let's do another take. Now Malcolm looked at the kid, and he's gone. He knows this kid will never recover, that they'll go through 75 takes that day. Stanwyck goes back to her first position. Action, down she walks again, starts to talk to him, and she blows her line. Cut, let's do it again. She says to the young actor, forgive me, we'll get this one. Class act.
Wow.
Class act. One more Stanwyck story?
Sure.
A friend of mine, Amzie Strickland, did an episode with her, and it was one where Stanwyck's character was committed to an insane asylum, and Amzie was playing one of the inmates. And at once Amzie had an emotional, hysterical scene, and Stanwyck was not in the scene. She was sitting on her high chair, watching, and Amzie did the scene, and Amzie could really let it roll, and she did it. And Virgil Vogel, who was the director, said, cut, print, and Amzie happened to look over at Stanwyck, and Stanwyck was going. So Amzie said, Virgil, could I do it again? I know I could do it better. He said, Amzie, it was fine. She said, no, please, let me do it. Just one more time. I know I can do it better. And so they went, and she did it again, and she pulled it back. And when Virgil said, cut, she looked at Stanwyck right away, and Stanwyck went, class act, yeah. Class lady. My one regret, I only worked with her 2 or 3 days. I would love to have really, and with a script, she had little to do in it. I thought Big Valley was not one of the better written series anyway. Class act, though.
Was that the first Western that you directed?
Mm-hmm. I'd done The Wild Wild West, but my Wild Wild West was more James Bond than Western.
Did you like Westerns, or did you prefer to do other types of dramatic shows?
No, it's all the same. The only thing on that one, I do remember the first time we were going on location, and I had a scene where a bunch of people were, 2 or 3 people were sort of congregating on horses, and I don't know why, without the buildings and things to sort of adjust, just wide open spaces, what do you do? And I remember thinking, okay, pretend they're police cars. And I did, and I got them together. I didn't do too many Westerns. I did that. I did later High Chaparral. I did, How the West Was Won. I didn't, of course, Westerns by that time were kind of passé anyway.
On The Fugitive, of which you directed 5 episodes.
4.
4, okay. It's a show that felt like it was shot on location. Was it in fact, or was it all on soundstage?
Oh no! It was in Hollywood, but Quinn shows The Fugitive. Usually, the normal show would be 4 days outside and 3 days inside. And the great thing about shooting in the LA area is that you really can match any part of the country. You can get the plains of the Midwest. You've got the the ocean, which could be either coast or could be, the Gulf of Mexico. You can find mountains. I mean, within driving distance of the studio, you can match anything. And so it does feel like it was shot like Route 66 out on the road, but it wasn't. It was shot in the LA area, but it was a location show.
When you have a single star of a show like David Jansen, and you're an actor's director, what is the challenge for you as a director directing a star who is in a continuing role? I mean, what is it that you can add, or what nuances?
Well, my thing was always, I mean, I did come in and try to impose. I never felt that I knew more about the character than they did. I mean, I always respected the fact that they knew it. I knew what I needed to do to make a scene work. And to do that, it was just a matter of putting people in positions and, to do it. And whenever I would block a scene, my first line after I'd blocked it in, how does it feel? So that if there was anything wrong, if there's anything that was uncomfortable, if anybody had any suggestions, I was open to it. So that I didn't have problems with I had some, but not with too many. And David was not one of them. David was fine. He was an aloof man. He was very aloof. I never really felt close to David. I never really felt I had great contact. I mean, we were two professionals working together, and I respected him. I think he respected me because he never questioned. I had a thing that I did with actors in doing close-ups. If they had an emotional scene, that I would not cut and then start another take, which, then you have to get wound up. If they were going, and if during the scene I saw that the scene had come alive, then I would just say, keep it rolling, let's go from the top. And on one show, a different series, an adult actor once, when I did that with the boy, questioned it. He thought it was inconvenient for him playing off camera to have to do it. And I said, I'm not doing it for you, I'm doing it for him. David never questioned it. He was sensational. When the Wind Blows, which was a story with, the 9-year-old little Johnny Jensen. And David, I mean, Johnny was a talented little boy, didn't go on to become an actor. I mean, he was just a talented kid. David made him better than, really brought him up. I mean, he brought a lot to it. David made him even better, just because David was so charismatic. And David, when he played a scene, was so into it. I have said production values on that show were sensational. Scripts from Alan Arbor were sensational. But the reason the show was a major success was David.
Why do you think a lot of shows have come and gone? That show has endured as a classic. Besides David Jansen's contribution, what else about the show?
Well, again, what you said before, the fact that it felt like it was done on location. And then Alan Armour did a wonderful job. I mean, they had their work cut out for them with that format. I mean, that sometimes they had Lieutenant Gerard, but so that you always needed the police, the danger to Kimball. But if they didn't have him, then the script had to provide a new Gerard. You had to have the involvement with the person, and it had to be interesting. They had to be interesting. It had to be an interesting involvement, and David had to be put in. Kimball had to be put in peril, and then you had to find a way, because you wanted the series to go on the next week. You had to find a way to get him out legitimately. I mean, why every week does he get to walk away? And they did it, and most of the time, I mean, I haven't seen all of them. I have to tell you, on all four of the ones that I did, each one of those corners was covered beautifully.
And it seems a signature part of the series was that even under great peril of being discovered, Kimball being caught, he was always helping somebody else, some other character.
Yes. Yes, and you know, and the fact that he was such a compassionate man, and that in that story, uh, and then the other thing is Quinn Martin, at a time when, I mean, nobody else was doing it, he was paying his guest stars $5,000. At a time when none of them were doing that, and as a result, he just had wonderful actors. Wonderful actors.
Tell me more about Quinn Martin as a producer. Pretty prolific.
I had very little direct contact with him, actually. You know, I got hired at the beginning, and did the two. I did the first two Fugitives, and then they sent me over and kept me on to go over to Fox and do their co-production that year of 12 O'Clock High. And then after I finished that, they wanted to book me for 3 more. And I said no, because Arthur Phillips, the executive, and I loved Arthur. I loved Arthur. But Arthur at that point did not allow directors in the cutting room. And I had been in the cutting room, you know, from my Metro days, and then the previous year I'd even served on a committee at the Guild when that whole problem of the Guild allowing of what the directors were allowed to do was, and I stayed on the committee just for a while because I'm not a committee person. But I just said, no, I'd rather work where there are, you know, where I can go into the cutting room. So the agent called me back the next day and he said, well, he talked to Quinn. And Quinn said, Ralph can go in the cutting room here. And so for the next 10 years, Arthur Fellows always teased me that I was the only director he would let in his cutting rooms.
You directed more episodes, I think, of the FBI than any other series, I believe.
I did,
about 15
eventually
16?
16.
Why? Why is that? Why? What about that show?
Well, as a matter of fact, it's strange because it was not really one of my favorite shows. I mean, the format was more restrictive than other shows. Once we got past 65, 66, the quality of what was being done and the caliber of series was dropping off. And when I found a niche like that, you stuck with it. And the second highest, I did 16 of those. I did 12, but 2 of them are 2 hours, so I really did 14 hours of the Waltons. And that was another niche. I mean, once you found one like that where you could do good work, I mean, that was fine.
What did Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. bring to that, and what was it like working with him?
Oh, he was a total gentleman, just a total gentleman, total delight. I mean, and a very accomplished actor, very accomplished. He didn't really, because of the role, and either he was, you know, he was being Erskine, and, you know, with all the legitimate stuff, or he was undercover. But I mean, look at Zimmy in Wait Until Dark, and he just exuded such charm. He was just great. No, and a total gentleman, total professional, and a joy.
We're at the end of this tape, so we're going to change.